Good morning and welcome to the virtual town hall hosted by the Middle States Commission on Higher Education and sponsored by Zytrax. I'm Brian Kirshner, Senior Director for Communications and Public Relations with the Commission, and we are so happy that you could join us this morning. It goes without saying that we certainly hope that you and your families, along with your faculty, staff, and students, remain safe and well in these most difficult times. We are thrilled, however, that we had 1,200 registrations for this morning's presentation. It's approaching the size that we would normally see at our now canceled annual conference. So again, thank you for taking time this morning to be with us. A few remarks before we get started. No need to speed read through the disclaimer, but I do want to remind you that this presentation remains property of the Commission, and if you have specific questions related to your institution, you should reach out to your Commission VP liaison. This presentation is being recorded, and we will be posting it to our website as well as our YouTube channel. We again want to thank our sponsor, Zytrax, a division of Concord USA. Zytrax is an accreditation, management, and assessment reporting system. They are a long-standing sponsor of the annual conference, and with that being canceled, we are so happy they are with us this morning. They can have one of their systems up and running securely, quickly, and easily for you. If you are interested in learning more, please reach out to them at their website, xitracs.com. So this morning, I am proud to introduce what can only be considered an all-star lineup. We have our president, Dr. Heather Perfetti, Dr. Christy Faison, Senior Vice President for Accreditation Relations, Dr. Ellie Fogarty, Lead Vice President, Colonel Gerald Kabilski, Director of Institutional Effectiveness and Professor of Mathematical Sciences at the United States Military Academy, as well as one of our commissioners. Ms. Erin Matson, Senior Director for Accreditation Services. Ms. Trey Patterson, Assistant Director for Accreditation Services. Dr. Stephen Pugliese, Senior Vice President and Chief of Staff. Ms. Mary Beth Kate, Senior Director for Regulatory Affairs. Dr. Amy Moseder, Vice President for Policy and Senior Policy Analyst. And finally, Ms. Carmela Smith, Director for Substantive Change. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge a number of commissioners who pre-registered to join us this morning. Ms. Lori Carter, President of Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania, Professor Ariel Guzman from the Conservatory of Music of Puerto Rico, Dr. Karen Jogan, Professor of Spanish at Albright College, Dr. Jonathan Perry, President of Manor College, Mr. Rick Pinkowski, Vice President for Finance at Villa Marie College, Dr. David Ream, Vice President of Academic Affairs at Misericordia University, and Dr. Javidan Rodriguez, President of University at Albany. We want to thank them for joining us this morning, as well as being representatives of their institutions, as well as our commissioners. So we're going to touch on a number of topics this morning. Dr. Perfetti will review the state of MSCHE, our rebranding, and the Commission's strategic priorities. Dr. Fogarty will talk about COVID impacted accreditation activities, including self-study. Colonel Kabilski will address virtual site visits. Dr. Faison will talk about accreditation review cycle, including AIU and MPPR. Ms. Matson and Ms. Patterson will speak about our all-important peer evaluators. Dr. Pugliese will join us for updates to MSCHE policies, procedures, and guidelines, as well as all of our extensive virtual training and webinar opportunities. Ms. Kate will talk about federal regulations, followed by Ms. Smith regarding substantive change policy and procedures, before Dr. Moseder reviews important policy issues. And time permitting, we will get to some Q&A. I will point out that those staff in the office this morning are practicing social distancing. When not at this podium, we are wearing our masks and keeping our distance. So we would especially like to thank those institutional representatives who submitted questions during registration. We will be answering many of them in the course of this presentation, but if you have any questions that come to mind as we move through this morning's program, please use the Q&A button on your screens to submit them, And again, we will try to get to as many of them as we can. Before I welcome Dr. Perfetti to the podium, I do want to note that we have tried to expand our presence on social media. Please follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram using our handle @MSCHE.org. If you are already following us, thank you. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Heather Perfetti, our president.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning and welcome. I too want to extend my appreciation to all of you for joining us today. 2 town hall events were promised in the spring and had to be canceled due to the pandemic. It remained important for us to find ways to gather together. As Brian mentioned, the virtual nature changes the dynamics, as we have over 1,200 who registered for this event. That means we can't take advantage of the hallway discussions that we so value, where we learn how you are doing. We can't informally chat about issues in higher education as part of those hallway discussions. And we don't get the benefit of meeting you and your colleagues in person. As a new president, that is truly disappointing. But I am committed, along with our commission, to finding ways to engage the membership throughout the year, throughout the pandemic. A survey will be coming out to you following this event, and we want and need your feedback. We want to know the kinds of events that you prefer. I want to thank Commissioner and Colonel Jerry Kubilski, who will share information with you about virtual site visits, an option we adopted this spring. Colonel Kubilski is truly the epitome of the work that we do as a commission, and he brings what I call the trifecta of experience. As a peer evaluator on the ground, leading and participating in team visits. As a leader of one of our commission's committees, and as a member of this commission. He not only believes in and celebrates the work of accreditation, but he has contributed to the higher education community to promote educational excellence, institutional improvement, and innovation. Our commission, and in turn our institutions, have benefited greatly from his contributions. And you will see that and hear that today. I also have to thank my amazing staff. You will hear about the work they have been supporting in the midst of heightened demands from the pandemic as the world shifted under all of us. The commission staff embody a can-do spirit that makes anything possible. And I hope those of you who have had the privilege to outreach to them or work with them directly feel it every time you talk with us and you hear from us. I'm going to try to keep my remarks a bit shorter today so that you can be introduced to and hear from more of our amazing staff. We know that all of our lives have been consumed by COVID-19, but we want to talk about other important areas of the commission as well. I will start with the status of our commission, remind you about our rebranding initiative, and share important information about our strategic priorities with a focus on the membership initiative that you heard about in July. We will then circle back to the challenges of the pandemic. I know some of you may feel more familiar with us than others, so I want to spend a few minutes looking at some key data elements about the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. You see on the screen, we have 32 staff. I always say we are small but mighty. We rely on the exceptional work of 29 commissioners who serve in a variety of roles through committee assignments. Our commission as a whole meets 3 times a year in March, June, and November. The standing and advisory committees of the commission that contribute to our work include an executive committee, the finance committee, committee on follow-up activities, committee on evaluation reports, the substantive change committee, a midpoint peer review committee, and we have a new committee dedicated to the processing of new applicant and candidate institutions. You will hear from other staff today about how to become a peer evaluator and the work of our peer evaluators. But you see on the slide that we rely on 1,700 peer evaluators. We want to thank you for your service. You see the total number of our Title IV institutions are serving over 2 million undergraduate students with $20.81 billion of Title IV funding. In the center of the slide, you see the total number of our institutions. At the time that we created this slide, we had a total of 525 institutions. Since this time, we had 1 institution recently surrender their accreditation, so we have since dropped to 524. You see that 300 of the 525 were private nonprofit, 203 are public institutions, and the remaining 22 were for-profit. The overall membership consists of a variety of institutions with different missions, sizes, Carnegie classifications, and educational scope. We work with both private and public systems, and you see those 7 systems on the screen in terms of the breakdown. One question that keeps coming to our attention relates to what we are seeing in terms of our membership, whether we are seeing a significant number of mergers, acquisitions, closures, conglomerations, consolidations, whatever name they may be called. Our membership has been relatively stable, although we have had institutions engaged in these kinds of transactions. At the same time, we continue to gain new candidate institutions and have interest in our commission. And I will talk more about that when we get to the membership initiative. As we celebrated our 100th anniversary last year, we continue to honor the foundations of the commission's past while looking forward to our future. We brought forward a rebranding that resulted in a new logo reflective of 3 pillars that will continue to define the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. The video we used to reveal our new logo at the 2019 annual conference will now play next.
Since 1919, the Middle States Commission on Higher Education has set a high standard for accreditation and has positively contributed to the higher education landscape. Today, we continue the commitment to our mission to ensure institutional quality, improvement, and accountability for the benefit of the students and the public that we serve, so that institutions deliver learning experiences and educational outcomes that students need and the future demands. Protecting the future of higher education, guiding for good, and always setting the standard in an ever-changing, innovative environment. This is the Middle States Commission on Higher Education, assuring trust and instilling confidence in higher education.
As the Commission unveiled its new logo and reflected on its past and future, it had the opportunity to identify 6 strategic areas of focus, and I will review those next. This morning, I'm going to focus on the membership initiative, but I do want to give just a few brief thoughts on the others. Data-influenced decision-making remains important for our Commission, And you will hear more about that as Dr. Faison talks about our accreditation processes. The Commission is looking at alternative resources, for example, through grants, that could potentially be pursued to support our strategic priorities and advance the work of the Commission. The advocacy initiative is an incredibly important one, and this is where we will individually and collectively do some work and have some impact. Recent advocacy has been tied to the pandemic, where we encouraged legislation for expanded broadband access for students. We sought extended flexibilities from the United States Department of Education. And we joined with the Council for Regional Accrediting Commissions to support an additional federal relief package for college and university students, as well as institutions impacted by the pandemic. We also signed on to the amicus brief challenging the now rescinded Immigration and Customs Enforcement guidelines impacting international students. Our goal is to become more innovative in the work that we do. We continue to look for ways to embrace innovation in accreditation, and we want to find ways to highlight the innovation of our institutions as well. This is an important narrative shift as we convey to constituents the good work that is occurring across our membership. This also includes exploring ways to modernize how we approach our work through an examination of the operations of the Commission itself. This speaks to the priority of the future of the Commission. I released a recorded message in July to share with you the decision of the Commission to no longer be bound by regional geographic boundaries as a result of the changes in federal regulations on July 1st, 2020. That message remains available at our website. I want to thank those of you who outreached in support of the initiative, offering to be of assistance and sharing in the excitement of the next steps. At the time of this decision, the Commission had already been conducting business in 48 states, 2 US territories, the District of Columbia, and 94 countries. The only states where the Commission had not been doing business were North Dakota and Montana. Here you can see the Commission's global footprint when considering main campuses, branch campuses, additional locations, and other instructional sites in the international context. What became clear as we evaluated the new regulations relating to the potential for a domestic shift, and as we considered the existing moratorium on international applications, it was clear the Commission had already proudly journeyed where you all had taken us, making us a global enterprise. The next slide will share with you the phased plan of this initiative. The domestic launch coincided with the regulations that went into effect on July 1st, 2020. The International Expansion Initiative is slated to begin January 2021 and will be a limited launch in areas where the Commission already has experience working with international institutions. I want to address a few of the more frequently asked questions about the membership initiative. How does this offer benefits to current members? While the first thought may take you to new institutions, there are benefits for current members as well, which we have seen already. I will highlight 2 of those that stem from institutional affiliations and partnerships. Current institutions that may be looking to merge or be acquired by an institution outside of this region would have been required to leave the region. As part of our now providing advice to institutions, The option of bringing partners into our membership can be a part of that discussion. Current institutions may also be encouraging their branch campuses in another geographic region to become independently and separately accredited. Those institutions can now recommend our commission based on the existing affiliation and the familiarity with the expectations of our standards for accreditation and our requirements of affiliation. Another question we receive is about interest in our commission. We continue to see an interest in our accreditation, but you should know that this was true before the July 1st change in regulations. Since November of 2019, we have had a total of 64 inquiries. Keeping in mind, not everyone who contacts us is able to demonstrate that they meet our minimum qualifications or that they can get through the rigorous process that we use for initial accreditation. Many also ask what the other commissions may be doing in terms of domestic expansion. This has been a difficult piece of the change in that commissions cannot discuss their strategies. The changes in regulation have resulted in accreditation now being viewed as a competitive market. What that means is we have had to adjust how we think and how we act. It is also the reason that the Commission adopted an antitrust policy and procedures to recognize the new sensitivities resulting from the July 1 regulatory environment. A final question we frequently receive relates to something far more simple. How do we refer to the Commission now? What phrase can we use if we can't use the word regional? The appropriate reference is now institutional accreditor. But I do want to reiterate our mission, our principles, our values, and our commitment to quality have not changed. In fact, we have taken steps to strengthen our front-end procedures to ensure the rigor that all of our constituents have come to expect from us. I want to switch topics to our biennial membership survey. I didn't want this morning to get by without acknowledging the responses of our accreditation liaison officers through this survey administered last year. We want to reiterate and we want you to know that we are listening. First, the facts. We had a high response rate with 358 ALOs completing the survey last year. Thank you so very much for taking the time to provide this important feedback, and thank you to the ALOs for all you do and the commitment you provide to serving as the link between our commission and your institutions. What we found and what you told us was that our communications were useful. The newsletter, the website, the portal, all tremendously helpful for you. We also heard that institutions in a process reported feeling supported, whether that was a self-study process, a follow-up process, or through substantive change. We also asked where we could do better, and we asked what was least well understood from your perspective. Not surprisingly, you told us substantive change was still a challenge. It was rated the least well understood. With this being a federally regulated area, it is complicated and it is nuanced. But I want you to know that the survey results inspired us to take some new and different actions to help clarify substantive change. We developed guidelines that include best practices and case scenarios to help you understand when something rises to the level of a substantive change. We have updated the website to try to make it clearer. You will hear about educational events that have been planned to help our institutional members understand substantive change even better. You also indicated it was difficult to know who to contact, and we are working on an improved Contact Us page at our website. You also reported challenges with the compliance process, and the least well understood were the requirements of affiliation. We have taken steps to provide more opportunities to engage with us on these, and we have simplified the advice that we give for demonstrated compliance. For the Midpoint peer review, it was new at the time of this survey, but we have made improvements, and you will hear about that from Dr. Faison later this morning. Know that our goal is to increase meaningful engagement, so please continue to respond to our surveys. And now let's address the impact of the pandemic on our community. As I stood at the 2019 annual conference as president-elect and said the commission will face challenges, we never envisioned that those would include a pandemic. Simply getting through the spring meant shifts and pivots like never before, and this academic year is already defined by the continuing effects of the pandemic, with everyone who has joined us today affected by conditions that continue to change daily. I want to highlight our general three-pronged approach to the pandemic in an effort to get information from institutions. We had delayed the annual institutional update as a result of the pandemic. As we did, we decided to add questions to collect more recent and relevant information about student enrollment and finances, and we are processing those results now. We reminded institutions about required notifications. We reminded you to tell us about your institutions, some of that stemming from existing policy and some of that new because of the pandemic. We wanted to know if the institution was experiencing a negative financial event likely to impact financial stability as well as compliance with our expectations. And we administered a survey in June. We plan to administer additional surveys, but first I want to share with you some of the results of the June survey. Institutions reported making a variety of changes since March 2020 due to the pandemic, and most reported that they had implemented remote work policies, they had closed campus buildings, they moved in-person classes online, and they expanded online teaching resources. We also asked about your concerns during the pandemic, and those were similar across institutions. Regardless of whether public, private, or for-profit, the top 5 concerns were consistent. The health of students, faculty, and staff, the inequitable impact on underrepresented students, the decline in future enrollment, the overall financial stability of the institution, and short-term unbudgeted financial costs. All were rated as extremely concerning or very concerning. We also asked how well we did during the pandemic from your perspective in terms of getting information to you or communicating with you. And you told us that our strategy was extremely or very useful. Our email communications, our webcasts, our webinars, and our individual communications were all favorably received. We asked where we could be of more help, and you responded that you are most likely to benefit from support, resources, or programming in the areas of distance education, non-degree offerings such as emerging credentials, institutional planning, and assessment. You will hear today about educational events that we will be bringing forward for this fall that were informed by these survey results. I want to say thank you to our institutional and system representatives who may be with us today. Your work is so incredibly important, and it has been made even more difficult during this pandemic. We hope that you have felt through the actions that we have taken, including temporarily waiving policies and procedures, that we have looked for flexibility designed to lessen chaos for you and your colleagues. In addition to data, what else was important was your narrative that you shared with us. And I want to spend some time capturing that. We know that there have been challenges, but you have reported how you have remained student-focused to ensure no interruptions to your students' academic journeys, but also to increase services designed to help your students. I think that is an incredibly important part of this narrative that is often lost in what gets shared. You shared with us how you responded to food and housing securities, which became more pronounced during the pandemic. You partnered with your communities to provide relief in those areas where you knew students would otherwise suffer. You fast-tracked virtual support centers and services. You increased online supplemental instruction and tutoring. Centers for teaching and learning became even more important and critical across your institutions. There was an increased sense of community and engagement with and for students within and across departments and across institutions. You developed and relied upon dedicated response teams to address student concerns more immediately. Professional creativity was reported as inspired, and we are all hearing and reading a lot about upskilling. It could just not be business as usual. Our institutions not only weathered the storm, but found and took advantage of opportunities for growth. I want to share just a few quotes with you that came in from our institutions. The first, many students gained personal confidence as they made the adjustment to a new mode of learning. The experience reinforced the importance of intangible skills like persistence and adaptability. Another quote, this was done rapidly. We did not miss a single day of instruction. Faculty and students found new and creative approaches to teaching and learning. We saw mentoring as a widespread strategy, with one quoted as saying, strong online faculty functioned as mentors for those with less experience. Another reported the college community has shown great agility, creativity, and innovation through these difficult times. Faculty, staff, and students came together in a time of crisis to support each other and fulfill the institutional mission. Another institution reported not only did our faculty collaborate with each other to provide innovative teaching to students, but our student affairs offices were innovative in their approaches to providing excellent student service in a remote environment. And that quote noted employer meet and greets, the building of intercollegiate esports, remote counseling, curbside textbook pickup, and a laptop loaner program. So again, we thank you for taking such good care of each other and your students, our students. Additional information about the impact of COVID-19 on the Commission's operations and accreditation activities will be delivered by the Accreditation Services Unit. So at this time, I want to invite Dr. Faison to introduce her section of today's presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Allow me to add my welcome to today's virtual town hall. For my portion of today's conversation, I'd like to provide you with some updates and insights on our continuing implementation of our 8-year accreditation review cycle process, which includes our self-study, evaluation, and the midpoint peer review. And I will also be talking to you about ongoing monitoring strategies, which includes the annual institutional update. I will be joined by my colleagues, Dr. Ellie Fogarty, who will be bringing you some updates about the impact of COVID-19 on our accreditation activities, as well as some information about our upcoming Self-Study Institute. Followed by Colonel Jerry Kabilski, who will be talking to you about virtual site visits. Followed by Ms. Erin Matson and Ms. Trey Patterson from our Accreditation Services Unit, who will be providing information about our peer evaluators. Included in our presentation will be responses to questions we have received from you about the MPPR, about virtual visits, and about delayed visits. So let's begin. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Ellie Fogarty, our lead vice president.
Thank you, Christy. Let's start our COVID by the numbers section of the town hall. 67% of our membership had all the distance education approvals necessary when the pandemic began to upset and impact operations in March. In accordance with the United States Department of Education guidance published on March 5th, the Commission was able to waive policy and grant temporary waivers to 173 institutions to deliver programs by distance education. Those waivers are in effect until December 31st, 2020. Since March, 26 institutions have applied for and been approved to offer distance education through the substantive change process. Another 14 institutions have applied and are being reviewed at an upcoming meeting. We've also posted FAQs relating to distance education flexibilities on our website. As far back as April of this year, we began advocating with the Council of Regional Accrediting Commissions that the USDE allow us to extend the waivers through the entire 2020-2021 academic year. However, as you know, the temporary flexibility for distance education expires this December. Last week, we delivered a very important message during the President's Provost event. If you plan to offer 50% of an educational program online beyond December, and you do not have the approval to do so within the scope of your accreditation, you must take action now. The next deadline to submit a subchange request is November 1st. We reported that we had no updates from the United States Department of Education on a possible extension into the spring semester. But by the end of last week, we began to hear that word of our event with presidents and provosts may have refocused some attention on the need for the waiver extension. This is all we know at present, and we promise to keep sharing updates with you as we have more information. We know you are curious about how the Commission is conducting accreditation activities and what does all of this mean for your institutions. I'll highlight some of those numbers for you now. This spring, when travel was no longer safe or possible, the Commission still had 50 domestic and international evaluation and follow-up visits to conduct. We had never done virtual site visits before, so as soon as we received guidance from USDE allowing virtual site visits, we offered this option to eligible institutions. 15 virtual site visits were completed by June 30, 2020, shown here at the bottom of the chart. Not all institutions were able or eligible to host virtual site visits. so the Commission granted delays for 35 of those spring 2020 visits. Now, to support this new style of visit, the Commission developed training for institutions and peer evaluators, which has since been viewed 267 times. I should say we relied upon 76 peer evaluators for virtual site visits during the spring. In today's virtual meeting, many of you who were or will be on virtual site visits are with us. We hope you realize how much we appreciate that you went above and beyond for us during this time. Those institutions and peer evaluators shared lessons learned and tips for virtual site visits, which can be found with the training on our COVID-19 website. Visits will continue to be conducted virtually for eligible institutions through December 31st, 2020, in line with the expanded flexibility from the U.S. Department of Education. So this fall, 23 virtual site visits will be conducted with another 150 plus peer evaluators contributing to the peer review process. Bringing us now to the top of the chart, because the USDE has not granted flexibility for virtual site visits beyond December 31st, and given the uncertainty caused by the pandemic, the changing environment at institutions, systems, states, and for faculty, staff, and students, the Commission offered 53 eligible institutions the option to reschedule their spring 2021 visit to new visit dates in fall of 2021. The Commission's accreditation actions, policy, and procedure allow such flexibility during extraordinary times. The Commission aims to balance two priorities with this flexibility: the safety, health, and well-being of all staff, peer evaluators, and institutional representatives, and the integrity of the evaluation process. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Jerry Kabilski for further information on virtual site visits.
Good morning, everyone. I'm truly honored to be here, representing all of my incredible fellow 28 commissioners. And thanks, Dr. Perfetti, for your gracious comments, none of which are deserved. Any successes our team has achieved is because of everyone on the commission, especially those joining us today. And this begins with the incredible Middle States staff support and your leadership. Beginning with the bottom line, I'm proud to report that thanks to you all, we as a commission are ensuring the same level of rigor and are maintaining the integrity of the well-established and respected Middle States processes. In this case, of which I'm going to speak to you about today, with our self-study reviews. Dr. Perfetti mentioned that I will speak about virtual visits, but I'll also touch briefly on the second and third levels of review, which comprise our 3 levels of review. Having participated in numerous of each of these 3 levels of review, I'll briefly share some perspectives across each that are reflected in the 3 gray large boxes on the screen, mostly focusing my remarks on the first, the team visits. In addition, I now have an institutional perspective as I've been fortunate to be part of West Point's preparation for our virtual visit, which begins in 6 days and 7 hours. Our team visits this year occurred February through April, both on-site and virtually, as Dr. Fogarty just mentioned. The peer evaluators on all of the visiting teams attended excellent virtual training, as they always do, but also engaged in the additional training focused on the virtual evaluation, which again, Dr. Fogarty just mentioned. Participants in the second and third levels of review also participated in this training. During the virtual visit meetings with the institutions, there was a high level of attendance at meetings, in particular the open sessions and the final team outbrief. The conversations were focused and broad and from diverse audiences. All institutional representatives were fully engaged and had sufficient opportunities to speak. Ultimately, team members clarified and verified areas of the self-study and had the same level of critique and assessment as face-to-face meetings. During the visiting team meetings, just the visiting team, both before and during the visits, members had the same level of thoughtful and reflective deliberations across each of the 7 standards, sometimes intense discussions. But overall, the team members thought the virtual visits were extremely effective at assessing an institution's compliance with our requirements of affiliation, our standards, our policies, and the federal regulations. And efficiency across all 3 levels, the visit, the committee, the commission meetings, as you would expect, was with respect to cost. Savings for travel, including travel time, hotel, and meals. There were some challenges, most technology, very similar to those with our distance learning that we experienced with the classroom. One challenge which pertains to what we all love about being in the classroom is the personal interaction with students and with each other. When you are visiting a campus, you can feel the excitement, the passion for student learning, and that culture of continuous improvement that is so often pervasive throughout with whomever you meet. But thanks to the innovation and resourcefulness from so many of you, we found and continue to learn solutions to these challenges. For example, again, Dr. Fogarty just mentioned this, that the Middle States staff has put together comprehensive lists that incorporate all of your great input. So I encourage you to take a look there. Now, the Committee on Evaluation Reports, the second level of review, met virtually for 2 days in June. And as you can see in the second box, the committee is composed of team chairs from those schools being discussed and commissioners who review all of the materials from the school to include the self-study, the evidence inventory, and the Middle States staff is always there in support. Committee members were prepared as always for the discussions on each school, had the same level of engagement as face-to-face meetings, and asked good questions of the team chairs, and when appropriate, expressed concerns. The challenge as the chair that I saw was not being able to fully read during discussions the body language of everyone, and thus knowing when more discussion might be needed. Again, similar to the classroom. At the conclusion of each meeting, I conducted a brief assessment of the meeting, and team chairs said that our discussions did not sound any different, the quality, the level of discussion, than when in person. All members felt extremely confident in bringing our recommendations to the third level of review, the commission meeting. This meeting, held at the end of June, was also virtual, and many commissioners participate in team visits and are also members of various Middle States committees. So they received the same or similar training as the peer evaluators. Again, same level of critique and diverse discussions as in-person meetings. And commissioners agreed that our decisions regarding Middle States, the finances, the policies, procedures, and most importantly, our discussions and final actions for institutions under review, felt extremely confident that we ensured consistency, fairness, and equity across all. A fifth and final perspective I'd like to share were the remarks from a Department of Education official during an event I recently attended as a commissioner representative. The official was extremely enthusiastic about how well the virtual visits for reaccreditation have been occurring. And all of the feedback, she said, has been positive. She highlighted the many conveniences of doing virtual visits, including that more observers, like from the Department of Education, can participate. And she also encouraged accreditors to think more about possibly continuing to do them. But as we just heard, this has only been approved through the end of December. I'd like to end where I began, and that's what I have seen as the reasons for the success of some of the successes I've mentioned above. And that's the many thanks that are owed to our peer reviewers and our institutions for being flexible, for their continued dedication to quality assurance, and especially the peer reviewers considering how their workload at home has significantly increased during these times. I know another reason for our success is because of the Middle States staff, their understanding, their guidance, their assistance, and always being proactive and innovative, which you're hearing about today, which continue to set us up for success. Colleagues, I'm honored to serve this great commission as one of your commissioners and look forward to working or meeting you in the future. And I'll be followed by my good friend, Senior Vice President, Dr. Christy Faison.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for those insightful words and for your dedication to the commission and to peer review. I'm going to turn our attention now to our accreditation review cycle and monitoring. You see the graphic on your screen, which describes our 8-year accreditation review cycle, which includes the self-study evaluation visit, the midpoint peer review, and includes our ongoing monitoring activities, including the annual institutional update, responses to recommendations, follow-up reports and visits, and supplemental information reports. Let's begin with the annual institutional update. As you heard from Dr. Perfetti, the AIU was delayed this year due to COVID-19, and so it opened in mid-July and closed in mid-August. The AIU is the vehicle that the Commission uses to gather essential information from our institutions, and it is a diagnostic tool for us, enabling us to assess institutional health. It's also the vehicle that we use for annual institutional updates related to Commission recommendations, and it is the source of the data for the MPPR. This year, there were some updates to the AIU that we hope that you noticed. It was in a tabular format. It had easy to read color-coded tabs so that you could gauge your progress. You were able to print it out this year. And so all of that feedback came from you in helping us improve the AIU experience. I said all of our AIU data is accumulated to develop the midpoint peer review. The MPPR is a peer review of financial data, student achievement data, viability and capacity, and responses to Commission recommendations. The purpose of the midpoint peer review is to identify any concerns that we might have about institutional health related to those key indicators. The Commission has established guidelines and indicators to help us analyze the midpoint peer review data report, which is provided to each institution in the MPPR cohort. You will see on your screen the midpoint peer review FAQ, where you can find out additional information about the MPPR, its outcomes, and the guidelines and indicators. The MPPR is relatively new to our accreditation review cycle and monitoring. The first MPPR was implemented with a group of pilot institutions, 15 of them, in 2018. Last year, 2019, was the first full cohort of institutions with 63 institutions participating in the MPPR. You will see on your screen the results of these two cohorts. The first row across will show you how many institutions had the MPPR conducted and required no further follow-up. The additional rows will show the type of follow-up requested for other institutions. For example, you could have been asked for follow-up in the next self-study. You could have been asked to respond to recommendations each year as part of the annual institutional update. For serious concerns, we may have requested a focused report, which would be followed by a focused team visit. And finally, if the institution was already being monitored, we may have asked that the recommendations be addressed in an existing follow-up report. One of the questions that we had dealt with clarity around the MPPR. I'm very happy to say, based on the feedback, we've made continuous improvements to this process. In 2018, with the pilot institutions, we had multiple indicators. After we developed the Midpoint peer review data report, we sent it directly to the peer evaluators for review. What we learned was that it would have been better to give institutions opportunities for feedback. And so for the 2019 and 2020 MPPR, you will see that we now have incorporated an institutional comment form, which allows you to provide additional feedback to our peer evaluators. For those institutions that received follow-up, you will see on your screen the standards and the recommendations provided by our peer evaluators and our commission to institutions, and they are listed in the order of frequency. They come from standards 6 and standards 4. So you will see that improved financial viability and sustainability was the #1 recommendation going out to our institutions as a result of the MPPR, followed by enrollment management, publishing student achievement data, improving key indicators of success like retention and graduation, and enrollment decline, and providing adequate fiscal resources. I want to turn now to a review of our self-study, which is based on a review of all 7 standards and our requirements of affiliation included in Standards for Accreditation and Requirements of Affiliation, first approved by the Commission in 2014 and piloted by a group of institutions in 2016-2017. We've had 3 cohorts of institutions go through self-study process using this set of standards, and you will see the cohorts listed on the graphic on your screen. You will see the number of institutions participating in each cohort. The next column will tell you the percentage of institutions that were reaffirmed, and further, those that were reaffirmed with no follow-up and those that were reaffirmed with follow-up. The final column will show you the percentage of institutions which were found to be in non-compliance with 1 or more standards or requirements of affiliation. Looking further at the standards that required follow-up based on non-compliance, you will see on your screen the 7 standards with 4 of those standards highlighted. Standard 2, Ethics and Integrity. Standard 5, Educational Effectiveness Assessment. Standard 6, Planning, Resources, and Institutional Improvement. And Standard 7, Governance, Leadership, and Administration. These 4 standards led to non-compliance in the 3 cohorts that you have seen. But 2 of these standards led to the most number of non-compliance issues in all 3 cohorts. And those 2 standards were Standard 5 and Standard 6. Now let's look at the standards that led to follow-up. These are highlighted in blue on your screen, and you will see that they include Standard 3, Design and Delivery of the Student Learning Experience, Standard 5, Educational Effectiveness Assessment, Standard 6, Planning, Resources, and Institutional Improvement, and Standard 7, Governance, Leadership, and Administration. You will see some overlap here with our non-compliant standards. And again, there are 2 standards that led to the most amount of recommendations for follow-up. And again, those are Standards 5 and Standard 6. So what did we learn when we look a little closer at Standards 5 and Standard 6? Well, I'm happy to report, with respect to Standard 5, that for the most part, gone are the days when we are saying to our institutions that you don't have an assessment plan or that you aren't collecting assessment data. And what we are finding is that institutions need to do a better job at documenting the use of assessment results. The other area is unevenness of assessment across all programs. So a lot of the requests for follow-up have asked institutions to demonstrate evidence that they are assessing their general education program or their graduate programs or their programs offered by distance education. Under the area of planning, resources, and institutional improvement, it won't surprise you that a lot of the follow-up had to do with financial viability and sustainability. But we also had follow-up around institutions aligning their planning, budgeting, and resource allocation processes. At the beginning of this presentation, you heard that the area of requirements of affiliation was one of the areas that is not well understood. At the time the Commission revised its accreditation standards, it also revised the requirements of affiliation. There are now 15, which you see on your screen. To be eligible for, to achieve, and to maintain accreditation, an institution must demonstrate that it fully meets all 15 requirements of affiliation. Once your eligibility has been established, you must demonstrate compliance in an ongoing process, always through the self-study process, but at any time there is an accreditation review. The requirements of affiliation highlighted in red are those which have led to non-compliance over the past 3 cohorts. The requirement of affiliation that you see in blue is the requirement that has led to the most amount of follow-up and non-compliance, and that is documented resources adequate to support the educational programs and to ensure financial stability. I want to bring your attention to one of our monitoring strategies, and that is called the Out-of-Cycle Supplemental Information Report, or SIR. This is a way that we monitor institutions even if you are not in self-study or as part of the MPPR. The Commission can request a supplemental information report anytime it has concerns about institutions' ongoing compliance with our standards, requirements, policies and procedures, and federal regulations. You will see in 2019, we issued 43 requests for supplemental information reports, and you will see the areas on your screen: compliance with other accreditors or issues with other regulatory agencies, from media reports or from investigations, complaints, or from Middle States Commission on Higher Ed Policy and Procedure. In 2018, we requested 30 supplemental information reports, and so there was a bit of an uptick in 2019 with 43. To date, in 2019, we have requested 26 SIRs. At this point in time, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Ellie Fogarty to talk to you about our self-study process and the impact of COVID-19.
Thank you, Christy. How can institutions already in self-study account for the impact of and their response to the pandemic? How will peer evaluators understand the context in which our institutions are operating? For those institutions whose spring 2020 visit was delayed, the Commission required a 5 to 10 page update document on changes at the institution since the original submission of the self-study report in the spring. For institutions proceeding with their spring 2021 visits, the Commission has requested that an addendum to the executive summary of the self-study report be included, since the self-study report has likely been or is almost complete at this time. For those institutions that chose to reschedule their spring visit to fall of 2021, and therefore will not be uploading their self-study report until 6 weeks prior to that new visit date, the Commission has requested that the institution integrate its response to the pandemic by standard as appropriate if they haven't already considered doing so. So I know your question is, can we exceed the 100-page limit? Yes, the Commission will be flexible if you need to add up to 15 more pages to your self-study. Remember, your peer evaluators have to read all of this information. The next cohort of institutions beginning the self-study process will host visits in 2022-2023. These institutions have been invited to the virtual Self-Study Institute because of COVID-19. The representatives will experience a series of synchronous and asynchronous modules over a 5-week period that includes opportunities for engagement with MSCHE vice presidents and other MSCHE staff, as well as engagement with other members of the cohort. We begin on September 29th. One advantage of this virtual format is that more institutional representatives will be able to participate in the training. During the institute, institutions will hear about the Commission's continuing use of data in accreditation processes and provide strategies for institutions to enhance the use of data on campus. The Institute will also provide guidance about how to address COVID-19 interruptions within the context of self-study. And now I'll turn it over to Trey Patterson and Erin Matson.
Hi, I'm Trey Patterson. I work in accreditation services. You know, oftentimes in accreditation services, we get telephone calls, we get emails from people wondering how they could get involved with Middle States. Well, the truth is we have one primary way to do so, and that is to volunteer as a peer evaluator. You know, all my colleagues before had made mention about peer evaluators, and in the upcoming slides, you'll be able to read testimonials of those who have shared their experiences as far as being a peer evaluator. Now, what do peer evaluators do? Peer evaluators are a vital part of our peer review process. These are the people that conduct visits, which are virtual these days. They read and write reports, and they make careful judgments about the institution's compliance. We have many different types of peer evaluators for many different types of reviews. Currently, we have over 1,700 higher educational professionals who are peer evaluators with us. These are people from your colleges and your universities. Some of them are even your colleagues. They are professors, presidents, provosts, CIOs, CFOs, deans, directors, and just so many more. In fact, many of you here today are peer evaluators, and I want to say thank you. Thank you for your dedication, your hard work, your commitment. You are the backbone to our organization. Now I'm going to pass it over to Erin, and she's going to share with you some of the benefits of being a peer evaluator.
Good morning, everyone. You may be asking yourself, why become a peer evaluator? For those who are not aware, I'd like to share a couple of benefits that peer evaluators have told us. First and foremost is quality assurance through peer review. The Commission's accreditation process ensures institutional accountability, self-appraisal, improvement, and innovation through peer review, and peer evaluators are the lifeblood of the peer review process. The experience of serving on teams and working with fellow peer evaluators serves as a wonderful opportunity to build a network of other higher educational professionals. It's also an opportunity to learn best practices from other institutions. And also, being a peer evaluator allows those who serve to become more knowledgeable about the accreditation process. Becoming a peer evaluator benefits you not only professionally, but personally, because what you learn about the accreditation process is knowledge that's transferable as you move throughout your higher ed career. Now to the how. How do you become a peer evaluator? Each year in November, the Commission opens up applications to become one. You go onto our website and click the link to start the process. To qualify, you must have 3 or more years of experience working in higher education. You must currently work at one of our accredited institutions, and you must meet the Commission's current needs. And our needs are always changing. This year, we're especially looking for individuals with finance experience, individuals who are bilingual in Spanish and English, and individuals with experience in student services. And though these are the current needs for the Commission, we encourage all to apply if you're interested. Once you apply and become accepted, you will need to complete an online orientation and relevant training prior to your first assignment. You will also be required to abide by the peer evaluator policies and procedures, complete a conflict of interest form, certify a statement of ethical conduct, and an antitrust certification of compliance for all assignments. So if you have any questions about becoming a peer evaluator, please check out our website. You can also email peerevaluator@msche.org. We look forward to your interest and to your application in November. And I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Stephen Pugliese.
Great. Good morning, and thank you, Erin. I would like to add my welcome to this virtual event. I always know that updates to the membership are always nice to receive, and especially during these times. There are areas of policy and regulatory affairs which I would like to talk about briefly today. MSCHE has a framework for the development of policies and procedures. This work has continued, and you will see policies with procedures being developed. I want to remind you that both carry equal weight in governing the actions of the Commission's representatives, and member institutions. Policies establish fundamental principles to mandate action or to govern the action of the Commission, representatives, and member institutions. And procedures define a series of steps, methods, or course of action taken to implement the policies. As a reminder, also is the Commission's expectation that the institutions comply with all applicable policies, including the Commission's, as well as those with the state and federal government. This is captured in both the requirement of affiliation, number 6, and the standards 2, criterion 8. Presidents and provosts and ALOs play a critical role in our policy development. As we develop policy, we ask institutional members to reflect on the policy and on the procedures and to tell us where the clarity may need. This happens through our call for comments when we are adopting new policy or making significant change to existing policy. In addition to the call for comments from our institutions, we do seek public comment, and many of our policies do undergo legal review. In some cases, we do reach out to our evaluators who are trained in unique issues or have specific experiences related to our policy to provide another perspective. This slide shows the significant work of the Commission, which has been happening during this review cycle. Some are new, while others have been updated. It is important that you visit our policy page on the MSCHE website to ensure that you always have the most up-to-date policy and procedure. All policies currently in effect can be found in the policy section of the website, while those under review can be found under the Policies Under Review tab at our policy website. We always communicate these changes via items and in particular through email notifications to the key contact. Dr. Amy Moseder, our Vice President for Policy, and Ms. Carmela Smith will be discussing some of the policies and procedures in more details, which have been in effect since July 1st and September 1st. But before we turn the program to them, I would like to ask Ms. Mary Beth Kate to provide a few regulatory highlights that do impact MSCHE and our institutions.
Thank you, Dr. Pugliese, and good morning, everyone. The Commission continues to monitor federal regulatory activity and advocate for our members where we can. This past year has been particularly eventful. As many of you know, the accreditation and state authorization regulations, which impact accreditors, institutions, and states, went into effect on July 21. July 1, 2020, I'm sorry. As the Commission has continued its review of its policies, our policy unit has already been incorporating regulatory changes into the revised or new policies and procedures. Earlier this year, we submitted comments on the distance learning and innovation regulations, which were published as a final rule on September 2nd. These regulations clarify definitions and requirements for innovative approaches to delivering education through distance learning, correspondence education, and direct assessment programs, and through both traditional and subscription-based terms. Although these regulations take effect July 1, 2021, institutions are given the opportunity to voluntarily implement any or all of the provisions now. We know how challenging the Title IX regulations were for institutions, provided the very short time you were given to develop new policies and procedures once that final rule was published on May 6, 2020. The Commission and 23 other organizations joined the American Council on Education in 2 amicus briefs submitted on June 24 and 26 to support a preliminary injunction against the U.S. Department of Education and Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos for the unreasonable implementation timeline. As you're aware, the injunction was not granted and these regulations did take effect August 14th. Under recognition by the U.S. Secretary of Education, accreditors are required to submit notification of its accrediting actions through the department's database of accredited post-secondary institutions and programs, or DAPIP. The department intends this database to be a public resource for information on institutions' accredited status, but because of their data definitions and submission procedures, the information is not necessarily current and is sometimes misleading or inaccurate. Please know this is not because we have reported incorrectly. It's because of the limitations the department has built into the reporting system. They are aware of these limitations and they invited public comment on the system and how it might be improved. Middle States was one of only 2 organizations that initially submitted substantive comment, and the department subsequently published a second invitation for comment. The Commission also endorsed 2 statements relating to transfer credit. The first endorsement related to the October 2017 joint statement on the transfer and award of credit issued by the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, Council for Higher Education Accreditation, and the American Council on Education. And the second endorsement related to the April 2020 Statement of Principles on Acceptance of Credit issued on behalf of the American Association of Community Colleges, American Association of State Colleges and Universities, ACE, Association of American Universities, Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, and the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities. These statements are intended to promote transfer credit policies that are reasonable, well-articulated, and facilitate transfer of credits however or wherever they are earned and in light of the extraordinary burdens resulting from the current crisis. So please be sure to follow the news page on our website for additional reporting on the Commission's work in the regulatory and advocacy space. There are a number of regulatory changes contained in the July 1, 2020 accreditation and state authorization regulations that will have a direct impact on the Commission's policies and procedures. And although I can't address every one of them in the time we have together today, I'd like to highlight just a few. An important change for all of our member institutions is the potential for a longer non-compliance period. As allowed under the July 1 regulations, the Commission has revised its accreditation actions policy and procedures to permit up to a 3-year rather than a 2-year window for institutions out of compliance. Under certain circumstances, because the Commission can opt to extend a non-compliance period for good cause, this means that the total potential non-compliance period has shifted from 4 years to 5 years, only in those circumstances when an institution can demonstrate it needs and the Commission determines it deserves extra time. Let me emphasize that this is a potential period of time, as the Commission retains the authority to require an institution to show cause at any time, at which point the Commission can withdraw accreditation. While the regulations are now requiring teach-out plans earlier and under new and different circumstances, our Commission has been requiring teach-out plans for any institution in a non-compliant status of probation or show cause. You'll hear more from our Vice President for Policy and Senior Policy Analyst, Amy Moseder, about teach-outs and the Commission's policy and procedures, which were updated and published on September 1. Another change pertains to the option for agencies to provide a retroactive date of accreditation for new institutions. The retroactive provision allows for an accreditor to predate an institution's initial accreditation back to the date on which candidate status was granted. The intent is to support students who graduate from an institution while it is in candidate for accreditation status, but that later becomes accredited. So it can help facilitate transfer and licensure opportunities. The Commission has addressed this in its new applicant and candidate review cycle and monitoring policy and procedures. The new policy and procedures establish a robust process that will support the Commission's decision-making, especially as we open eligibility both domestically and internationally. They also will ensure that institutions awarded accreditation following candidate for accreditation status will have earned the retroactive date of accreditation. One change that will not necessarily be felt by institutions, but that definitely does impact the work of accreditors, is the process by which accreditors are recognized by the department. Just like our institutions, accreditors also have to go through a review that requires substantial reporting on regulatory requirements, as well as review by the department staff and the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity. Some brief highlights of those changes include a different cycle for the submission of information tied to the petition, a different on-site experience with the department staff analyst, who will have broader access to Commission files during that person's visit to the agency's office, expanded site visits, and a restored requirement that the Commission be in substantial compliance with the department's regulations. Dr. Pugliese noted earlier that the regulations also now make clear that institutions are required to submit to arbitration for adverse actions before initiating other legal action. I'll note here that in addition to establishing procedures for arbitration, the Commission has included this in its revised accreditation actions policy and procedures and in its updated bylaws approved by the Commission at its June 2020 meeting, which became effective July 1. I note that non-compliance actions are different from adverse actions. As a reminder, adverse actions for this Commission are defined as the denial of candidate for accreditation status, the withdrawal of candidate for accreditation status, the denial of accreditation, and the withdrawal of accreditation. I do also want to highlight here a couple of other changes to the bylaws. First, references to MSCHE as a regional accreditor or any restriction on the geographic scope of the Commission's work have been eliminated. The revisions also establish a new advisory committee of the Commission for applicant and candidate institutions that will support the implementation of the new policy and procedures. The process of appointment and election of new commissioners has been updated, and the bylaws now address the use of the MSCHE logo as a membership right and privilege. We want institutions using our new logo, and we have published MSCHE logo usage guidelines that provide institutions with more flexibility. You can locate these new guidelines that went into effect on March 1 in the Policies tab of the Commission's website. If your institution is already using the new logo, thank you. If not, please reach out to communications@msche.org. As members of the corporation, we encourage you to become familiar with the bylaws and to understand your rights and responsibilities as members. So we have made them publicly available on the Commission's website under About Us. They provide important items for institutional members that are expanded upon through Commission standards for accreditation, requirements for affiliation, policies, and procedures. Finally, the most significant changes under the new regulations, from our perspective, are those most likely to impact institutions, and these are in the area of substantive change. It's important to note that while the regulatory environment may have shifted, the Commission is not absolved of its responsibility to understand institutional activities in the way that our Commission deems important and appropriate as an accreditor. So now I'll turn it over to Ms. Carmela Smith, our Director for Substantive Change, to talk about the changes in this area.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Good morning, all. I am going to give you a brief overview of some of the regulatory changes. This includes updates to the website, fee structure, forms, and the requirements. And as Mary Beth mentioned, as a result of the federal regulatory changes, we had to also make changes to the policies and procedures. Let me add that substantive change is directed by the United States Department of Education guidelines. That means certain types of institutional changes are considered substantive and require Commission review and action prior to implementation. The MSCHE website has a dedicated section for substantive change that provides links to the resources related to substantive change. On the substantive change webpage, you will find deadline dates for submitting your substantive change request forms, instructions on how to submit a substantive change request, the substantive change request forms, information on the required notifications and prior approvals, and information on how to report a lower credential level, the peer evaluator review forms, and a list of related policies and procedures and guidelines. Another significant change is the fees model. The Commission has been adjusting its dues and fees model to better align with the work required. The fees for the substantive change are broken down into tiers, with the fee determined by the complexity of the type of change and the process for review. You are now looking at a snapshot of a section of the substantive change website labeled Substantive Change Request Forms. The chart includes the types of substantive change, links to the request forms, the fees associated with each type, and whether a visit is required for that particular type of change. The request forms are submitted to the Commission by the institution's Accreditation Liaison Officer. There are 6 deadline dates for submitting requests to be reviewed at a subsequent substantive change committee meeting and followed by an action by the executive committee. The regulatory changes also require the Commission to reorganize the types of substantive change. The Commission kept the fundamental framework for the same with the types, but we added a new subtypes and revised some of the definitions and requirements for submission. The changes added new requirements, but shifted some responsibilities for substantive change to reporting or notification for some institutions. We have identified some changes to the types of substantive change based on the new regulations. The changes are shown here as underlined text. It is important to note that the definitions and examples for all the types are provided in the substantive change guidelines found on the MSCHE website. There are 4 new types that require notification or prior approval. Those types are, number 1, change in existing program's method of delivery. 2, aggregate change of 25% or more of the program's curriculum. 3, customized pathways or modified programs. And finally, number 4, written arrangements for the provision of 1 to 24% of an educational program. And again, I'm sorry, we don't have time for definitions and these requirements. Please see the substantive change guidelines. Prior approvals are required for any of these types of change for institutions that have, 1, have been subject to a non-compliance action by the Commission in the past 3 years. This includes issued or continued warning, probation, or show cause. Or if your institution is under a provisional certification for participation in Title IV HEA programs, institutions that fit into one of these categories are required to submit the prior approval form to seek approval from the Commission prior to implementation. The forms for these types are available on the website. Institutions that do not fit into the categories I just described should report a notification for each within 30 days of the start or launch of the program. These institutions should submit notifications directly in the portal by completing a few questions in the screening form. No additional information is required. And yes, that means no form is required. An approval is not required before implementation. And I must, the Commission has waived the $200 fee for the 2021 fiscal year for reporting the notifications and prior approval requirements. Previously, institutions were required to submit a substantive change request for credential levels that are lower than those currently included within the scope of the institution's accreditation. This change no longer requires prior approval through the substantive change process. Institutions should report a new lower credential level to have it included on the institution's statement of accreditation status. The lower credential levels can be reported through the substantive change screening form in the portal, which is available at any time. And again, there's no documentation to submit for these notifications. And if you have any questions related to substantive change, please email us at substantivechange@msche.org. And as Heather mentioned earlier, we are holding trainings in the substantive change area. So please mark your calendars for the upcoming free webinars on how to complete a substantive change on October 9th and submitting a complex substantive change on November 6th. I will now turn it over to Dr. Amy Moseder, Vice President for Policy and Senior Policy Analyst.
Thank you, Carmela. Good morning, everyone. We certainly are in an interesting and challenging time for higher education. We know that COVID-19 and the challenges it's raised are heavy on your minds. This word cloud shows just a few of the many important policy issues in the higher education environment, and some of which become even more important in a COVID environment. As you've heard earlier, the Commission is revising and developing new policy and procedures, and much of that work has been strengthening Commission policy and procedures around these as well as other issues. I will take a few minutes to narrow in on some of these. The Commission is committed to promoting good communication and transparency. It is a very upfront goal for us to convey useful and accurate information about accreditation and what accreditation means. Many of you know that the Statement of Accreditation Status, or SAS, is the Commission's official statement about the institution's accreditation status, and this is one of the ways we communicate and convey information about institutions to the public. The SAS can be found within the institution directory at the Commission's website. The Commission has made a lot of changes to the SAS that we hope bring some clarity and structure to what MSCHE accreditation means. We've not only reorganized information, but added key terms like accreditation phase and accreditation status. Accreditation phase is if the institution is accredited or a candidate institution. Accreditation status refers to the institution's standing with the Commission upon its last review, whether it is in a non-compliant status or has been reaffirmed, for example. Although these terms are esoteric jargon and perhaps not widely understood, we are aligning the information we share, and we are defining these terms explicitly in policy and procedures in an effort to make them more familiar and regular. The SAS includes information about the institution's scope of accreditation. When we talk about scope of accreditation, we mean the range of educational offerings, such as credential levels, alternative delivery methods, or locations that are covered by the institution's accreditation, as shown here on the SAS in these tabs at the bottom. This is the information the Commission shares publicly. So the institution should review this information periodically and ensure that it is accurate. So while the Commission has been working hard to be transparent, we must balance that with the need for confidentiality to preserve the integrity of the accreditation decision-making process, and we are mindful of privacy concerns. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about the Commission's expectations for confidentiality, which are addressed in the communication in the accreditation process, policy, and procedures. The Commission, including its staff and representatives, are expected to maintain confidentiality. Confidentiality applies to all materials, all discussions, all proposed actions, all records, and any posts on social media. While the Commission has a presence and has been more active on social media and is working there on accreditation advocacy, peer evaluators should not share information about specific institutions that are under review in posts on social media. In addition, even institutions should not post or publicize accreditation actions if that action has not gone through the entire accreditation decision-making process. That is, no one should imply that the Commission has taken a particular action until the official notification process has taken place. The rationale here is that because there is a multi-level accreditation decision-making process, proposed actions can and do change. The Commission considers accreditation materials to be the property of the institution, and the institution can share them so long as those materials are presented in context and do not provide misleading information. Some institutions do opt to post the team report publicly online. If you do so, please protect the privacy of individuals engaged in peer review by removing names. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that some other accreditors may post team reports at their website. Our commission has determined that it will not do so, but it continues to make important information about accreditation available publicly. We expect this will be an ongoing discussion as we continue to balance the integrity of the self-study process with expectations for more transparency. At the most broad level, the Commission expects institutions to provide accurate consumer information and to do that in the spirit of transparency, honesty, and integrity. We know that there are many additional requirements being placed on institutions related to disclosure. Part of this conversation is how clearly the institution represents its accreditation status. The Commission's public disclosures policy and procedures provide a sample statement for both accredited and candidate institutions. This should be a comprehensive statement about the institution's accreditation phase, accreditation status, and the scope of accreditation, which we talked about earlier. It is important to mention that although we provide a sample, the Commission is not prescriptive about the exact wording down to the letter, and you have some flexibility here. However, it should clearly convey the institution's current accreditation status. The federal regulations now explicitly require the institution to disclose non-compliance and adverse actions within 7 days of receipt. This can be done in this statement as shown in this example on the slide in the highlighted text. The Commission should now be referred to as an institutional accreditor rather than a regional accreditor. I mentioned scope of accreditation earlier. The institution should always accurately represent any proposed substantive changes in advertising or marketing materials and should provide a list of geographic locations and programs available at those locations. The institution may link to the list of locations that the Commission posts in the institution directory or SAS, or the institution can provide a graphic or a chart similar to how the Commission shares information about our global footprint. The Commission has used teach-out plans as a means to collect critical information earlier in the process and share that information with students and the public. We have been asking for teach-outs with probation and show cause actions. The new federal regulations expand the circumstances for which a teach-out is required, and there are now additional circumstances, 13 in total. The Commission revised the teach-out policy, procedures, and form, and updated this information. You can find the complete list of all of these circumstances, as well as other important procedures related to teach-outs in all of those 3 documents, which you will find posted on our website. If one of these circumstances arises at your institution, the Commission will make a formal request to the institution for a teach-out plan. If, for example, your institution is put on probation, the Commission will include the request for a teach-out plan in the action language. Another example, and a new situation, would be if the Secretary of Education notifies the Commission that the institution was placed on heightened cash management 2. In this case, the Commission would send a formal request for a teach-out plan and agreements. This request would typically go to the Accreditation Liaison Officer. In the case of a substantive change that requires a teach-out plan, the substantive change procedures and the request form will specifically state that a teach-out plan is required and provide instructions for how to submit the teach-out plan. And the institution will need to download the teach-out form from our website and provide the information requested in that form. The Commission is committed to providing clarity around transfer of credit as a means to assist students. This seems especially important given the current environment and the implications of COVID. The Commission requires institutions to have a transfer of credit policy that is publicly disclosed and includes a statement of the criteria established by the institution regarding the transfer of credit earned at other institutions. It is important to note that the acceptance or denial of transfer credit cannot be exclusively determined on the basis of the accreditation of the sending institution or on mode of delivery, but on course equivalencies, expected learning outcomes, and curricula and standards. The federal regulations now explicitly state that all credits and degrees earned and issued by an institution or program holding candidate for accreditation status from a nationally recognized agency are considered by the Secretary of Education to be from an accredited institution or program. The rationale for this change is to assist students with licensure requirements, transfer, and employment. As Mary Beth mentioned earlier, the Commission recently endorsed 2 statements which are intended to promote transfer of credit policies. We will integrate these principles into Commission policy and procedure as the Commission reviews this policy in the early part of next year. We will most likely provide additional guidance on this topic. If you have any questions related to policy, you can email us at policy@msche.org.
Thank you, Amy, Carmela, and Mary Beth for bringing us up to date on all relevant to policy, procedures, and regulations. We were saddened, as you heard, about the cancellation of our annual conference because we know this is a great opportunity for you to share best practices, receive key updates, and to learn from your higher education colleagues. But the Commission is very committed to sharing educational opportunities for our membership. We ask that you please check back periodically on our website as you can see the listing of events that are relevant. We have hosted a variety of trainings over the summer for our peer evaluators and institutions. We are happy to share other events for the fall. These events, as I said, can be found on the MSCHE website. I do want to take a quick moment to say how grateful we are to our colleagues at Beaver County Community College and SUNY Empire. Our colleagues at Beaver County Community College will share lessons learned during the COVID with performance-based strategic planning, and our colleagues from SUNY Empire will talk about an array of best practices on assessment during this time of COVID. And as you have heard from Dr. Fogarty, the Self-Study Institute is just one training that has been moved to virtual. This event will take place over 5 days. Going virtual has given us a greater opportunity to reach a wide variety of our members, and we look forward to providing training opportunities throughout this academic year. We do encourage you, as I said, to check back through our website throughout the year. These events that are currently listed are for the fall, and it is our hope that in November, we will be able to list to our membership our spring events that will be available. Before we go to the questions, I want to again thank our sponsor, Zytrack. And I also would like to thank our panelists that presented today, including Dr. Jerry Kobelski. And now for the questions and answers. We have received a lot of questions prior to the event, and we have been trying to monitor as they have been coming in throughout this presentation. So I will do my best to get to as many questions as possible, but please know that given the time limit, that we will not get to answer all questions, but we will reach out to you if there is a specific question that your VP liaison or one of the presenters today can assist you with. And as we begin this, I will ask Dr. Perfetti In her opening remarks, she talked about the regionalization and our new expansion. One of the questions is, what will the impact on regional accreditation be? And will we be just racing to the bottom?
Great, thank you, everyone. I know we have had a significant number of you stay with us throughout this event, and we appreciate the questions coming in. So we frequently hear the reference to race to the bottom, and I know that's been reported in the media as well. And I would respond to that by reminding everyone that the Commission has strengthened its applicant and candidate processes, not just through a new policy and procedure framework, but also where we are shifting decisions to a new committee that has been established by the Commission, as well as a number of new features in the process on the front end. There have been embedded layers of rigor, and our Commission remains proud of the work that it does to protect quality and rigor in our processes, and we don't see that affecting our Commission as it moves forward, or that we would treat institutions with any less rigor as we advance this initiative.
Thank you, Dr. Perfetti. I'm going to ask Ms. Carmela Smith to address this next question as it revolves around distance education and substantive change. If an institution is approved for one distance ed program under the old regulation, are they now fully approved under the new regulation?
Thank you, Steve. That's a great question. And we didn't have time to really go into detail of some of the new changes because of the regulations as a result of substantive change. But that is one of the changes for distance education. You only need the first program approved through the substantive change process. So if you've already had one program approved prior to July 1, you are considered fully approved. But as I mentioned earlier, there are the 4 new requirements. And one of those requirements is a change in the existing program's method of delivery. So that could possibly be, if you're adding new programs, it could be possibly a prior notification or a notification in that case.
Great. The next question, obviously we all have been impacted by COVID-19, and I'm going to ask either Dr. Faison or Dr. Fogarty to speak about, will there be any effect on the midpoint peer review and or self-study cycle based upon COVID-19?
Okay, I think we'll split this question. Ellie, I will take the MPPR and I will give it to you to talk about the impact of self-study. So because the MPPR is based on accumulated AIU data, the COVID-19 pandemic has not impacted our ability to conduct that particular review. And in fact, the 2020 cohort of institutions is currently reviewing their MPPR data report, and our peer evaluators will begin to assess that data next month in October. Ellie?
Okay, and for self-study, I think we may have covered this. We're asking institutions to provide the information within the self-study in different ways, depending on which cohort of institutions they're in. And we're asking peer evaluators to take this contextual information into account as they conduct a holistic review based on the standards for accreditation, requirements of affiliation, policies and procedures, and federal compliance, so that they are not distracted by the response to the pandemic. They are looking at it holistically within the self-study.
Great, thank you both, Dr. Faison and Dr. Fogarty. It's interesting that this question that has come in through our Q&A this morning, as well as what we've learned from our President Provost event that we held last week. And I'm going to ask Ms. Carmela Smith to address this, as well as if Dr. Faison or Dr. Fogarty have anything else that they would like to add. But the process about substantive change, and is there any expedited process for substantive change for distance education being looked at by the Commission? So Carmela, if you would like to start, and then I think I'll ask Dr. Faison or Dr. Fogarty to join in.
Yeah, unfortunately, we do not have an expedited process.
Carmela is correct. There is no expedited process. You do have until November 1st to submit substantive change approval for distance education. That is the final date for the 2020 year for submissions. As you have already heard, the department flexibilities go through December 31st, 2020. And at this point in time, we have no additional information about an extension of that flexibility.
Great, thank you. As we look at the last question around the COVID and the impact, can we explain the impact on when institutions that have fall visits, when they will be reviewed by the commission?
Institutions that currently have visits could be on the March 2021 agenda, depending on the time of your visit. So if you will check our Self-Study Institute guide, it outlines the dates of your visit and then the subsequent commission meeting at which your institution will be on the agenda. But just a heads up, if you have a fall 2020 visit, you will not be on the November agenda. You will be on the March 2021 agenda based on the dates of your visit.
Great. And that at this point, it appears that most of our questions that have come in have either been addressed in the presentation or through our current question and answer. We do have some specific questions that we will address via your Vice President Liaison or one of the panelists today. And again, we would like to thank our close to over 1,000 folks who joined us today on this town hall virtually. And we hope that everything goes well for your semester. And as we conclude here, I do want to remind you of the various resources available to you at the Commission. And on behalf of all of my colleagues here at the Commission and our commissioners, thank you and have a wonderful day.